the focus of what I want to say this morning is about what many, particularly in the United States, but also in other parts of the world, have thought of as a catastrophe of journalism, an economic-born catastrophe, but one in which democracies in the United States, in the UK, in France, and elsewhere around the world, are in some grave danger if you believe that journalism, news gathering, is a requirement for democracy. I was in France the last several days and came upon a recent book by Bernard Poulet, in which the first chapter is entitled, Should We Be Getting Panicky? The book is entitled The End of Journalism. And certainly in the United States, there's been a lot of discussion about whether we should be getting panicky, and some people have not asked the question, they've just been getting panicky. And the question that's been around for several years now is not if, but when we will see the first major American city without a daily newspaper. So what I want to share with you are some notes and observations about what is happening in the world of journalism as it is being transformed at the moment. At different rates and in different ways in different countries. My experience is mostly the US, but this has reverberations and resonances, comparable things happening. Not everywhere in the world. There is no crisis about journalism in India. It's growing by leaps and bounds. Broadcast, print, English language, native language, and so on. But in Europe, in North America, and elsewhere, there are some serious economic problems for various parts, most parts of journalism. First, and probably most familiar, the line between reader and writer is blurred. Most people who comment on blogging without actually reading blogs think of bloggers as self-absorbed, angry, and extreme venters of opinion. There are millions of bloggers. Many of them are no doubt angry and extreme venters of opinion. But I've been impressed in the last couple of years by the others. I'm impressed that people with expert knowledge choose to blog, and those who combine expert knowledge and skill and verve in writing develop substantial followings. In more and more fields or subfields of knowledge, informed members of micro-communities read bloggers in their field. This is true as the report that was mentioned that I co-authored with Leonard Downey in the fall. In working on that report, I became aware for the first time of a micro-community that I call the future news community. So the world of readers and writers, journalists and their audiences, or what people formerly known as the audience, has blurred. There's also a blurring of lines between different forms of journalism: tweet, blog, newspaper, story, magazine, article, book, and others. Those of us in the academy who study journalism almost always focus on the story, the story as such, and usually the front page story. But there's a whole curriculum of journalism, and the front page story is only the intro course. The idea of a curriculum in journalism I trace to my late colleague, James Carey. He wrote a paper 25 years ago, that asserted that journalism is a curriculum. Its first course is the breaking stories of the daily press. There one gets a bare description, the identification of the actors and the events, the scene against which the events are played out, and the tools available to the protagonists. Intermediate and advanced work, the fine-grained descriptions and interpretations await the columns of analysis and interpretation the weekly summaries and commentaries, and the book-length exposition. It is a weakness of American journalism that so few of the students ever get beyond the first course. I think Harry was right, and he was as right about journalism studies as about journalism. We lavish our attention on the front page and little else. In the last couple of months, I've just read what I believe to be the first book manuscript by a social scientist that focuses on opinion journalism in the United States. I wish I'd written it. I didn't. But when you think about it, that's quite astonishing that we should be so slow about getting to a large part of journalism. The third blurring is between professional and amateur. And it's not quite the same as the blur between reader and writer. Various new developments have emerged in journalism that people are calling pro-am journalism, a combination of professionals and amateurs working together. The blur here is a case where the initiative remains with the journalist in the pro-am kind of formation. But the journalist then enlists amateurs as co-workers, or in a way as research assistants. The fourth blurring is an economic blurring. The line between for-profit, public, and non-profit media has blurred, and cooperation across different forms of financing has developed. American journalists who swear allegiance to the First Amendment have traditionally been very hostile to any government involvement in news organizations. This is still true, but it is true in the face of increasingly uncomfortable facts. The fact is that the U.S. government has subsidized the newspaper industry since the Postal Act of 1792, which gave newspapers preferential rates for the use of the U.S. postal system. The fact is that the public broadcasting system, television and radio, since 1967 has been producing news reports that only public financing made possible. The First Amendment states that Congress shall not abridge freedom of speech or of the press. It does not say, it has never said, that the government shall not find ways to enhance freedom of speech or of the press. For the first time, I believe ever, at least ever in my life, journalists, some of them, are beginning to see in my country that federal subsidies to the news media might possibly make sense. My co-author this report, Leonard Downey, was the executive editor of the Washington Post for nearly 20 years. He joined me in the fall in endorsing expanded government funding to National Public Radio and in proposing that the government establish a fund for local news to give financial support to innovations in local news reporting. The fifth blurring is the blurring of the line within commercial news organizations between the newsroom and the business office. We talk about a wall of separation, that journalists speak of this in the US, a wall of separation between what goes on in the newsroom and what goes on in the business operation of the newspaper or television station for which they work. In fact, that wall is porous, or has been porous very much of the time, but over the last 50 years at our leading news organizations, the wall has been relatively secure. That wall is crumbling.